Welcome everybody to the Serpent Tarot for another pick a card reading, and this is definitely meant to be fun. So I often say that, and then it gets really serious, and I guess it's possible that things get a bit serious, but we're not really looking in this reading about things that are going to come up or happen in your life. I mean, there might be a little bit about how this connects to your life at the moment, but that's about it. It's really more of a fun exploration in who would you have been if you had been in a medieval court. And there's a couple of reasons or a couple of inspirations for the reading. One is that I just recently acquired via Kickstarter a really beautiful new deck called the Baroque Tarot. You can see 3 of the cards from it. That's the tarot, or it's the main tarot we'll use in this reading, though I will actually use a secondary, more modern tarot a little bit near the end of the tarot section, just to sort of like have a look at how that all manifests in the modern world as well. But it seemed ideal to do something set in the medieval world as a way to showcase and introduce this tarot to my collection and to my readings because of the beautiful artwork and the time period that it evokes. So that was sort of part of it. And the other part of it is I've always thought, from having worked in HR and organisational strategy, that surviving the workplace in some ways is like surviving a medieval court, and certainly the higher and higher, the closer and closer you get to the very senior people, the more and more you see this, just as they would say the closer you got to a king or queen in a medieval court, the more power you'd have, but also the more precarious your situation could be. So I happen to be one of those people who loves the series like the Borgias and the Tudors and all that kind of thing. I just find it a very fascinating time in history, and I think it is because I can recognise the power dynamics. So what we're going to do, it's not really going to be work-based here. That's just, I think it's true of many things, political, social causes, groups, online, whatever it is. There's a similar sort of pattern around where influence, power is, love is, intrigue is, all of that kind of thing. So hopefully this will just be a bit of fun. And so it's kind of would you have been a ruler? Would you have been a sort of part of the inner circle and advisors? Would you have been a performer? Would you have been a spiritual or religious power sort of person? Would you have been a paramour of someone powerful? Who might you have been? That's what this is all about. So just a bit of fun, as I say, and I hope you'll enjoy it. So you can certainly go to more than one reading if you like, because you might have been some amalgam of two, or you might have had a couple of lives in medieval sort of England or Italy or France or wherever, and so have a couple of different sort of experiences that are now part of your personality and spiritual kit bag. So you do you on that. But to help with it, I did shuffle and ask for the first 3 major arcana cards to be part of the reading for each of the piles. So for pile number 1, we have the Devil, which proves that would probably be a pretty interesting life we might be looking at, or type of role we might be looking at there. For pile 2, we have Temperance, and for pile 3, we have the Sun. So when you know what reading or readings you'd like to go to, the timestamps are in the description box below, and I'll see you there. Welcome, pile 1, to your reading. So you came to the intriguing one with the Devil, which could be a number of different roles. It could have been sort of someone who's very much into political power. It could have been some sort of despot, because certainly and I'm not saying you were one, I'm just saying the kind of energy about power. But that certainly we could say that about certain people and sort of like royal positions or whatever. It could also be, the thing that most draws me with this is the Machiavelli type, the type that understood and knows the art of diplomacy, but also the art of political intrigue. And I think that kind of fits with the other cards here, because I wanted to use a couple of modern examples of things from kind of workplace or career, and then a couple of astrology energies. So when we start with the Devil, I mean, certainly the way it's being portrayed is as though it's a ruler, but it could also be this figure that's close to the ruler. And this is why I'm feeling that like you would have been, rather than necessarily a king or queen, you're more likely to have been the power behind the throne, the one that you understood the intrigue, understood the light and shadow. But certainly the way it's being portrayed looks quite seductive. So it could range anything from being a Machiavelli type to even being sort of a very attractive person within the more intimate relationships with a king or queen that are bringing change, making change occur and so forth. And there's sort of almost like a performative aspect to it as well. This is also shown by the fact that I feel that there's something quite private about whatever power influence you would have had with the 12th house. And that, you know, possibly when it's talking about escape here, that you may have needed to sort of find space for yourself because of the intrigue. But we've also got the Grand Cross, the provoker, somebody who provoked difference, change, provoked the ideas of those who are making decisions, provoked the nature of the court and so forth. With the artist and the word culture compass, which makes me think of someone who would have had a lot of performative ability. So I'm sort of veering between, and we'll see what we get with the tarot, but I'm sort of veering between, as I say, a sort of Machiavelli, a political advisor who knew how to create diplomacy, you know, almost as an art form, or possibly sort of someone who had a significant impact on a royal member of the royal family or something like that in terms of their attractiveness. Now, an obvious one that occurs to me, only because I paid a lot of attention to the story of this person, I've mentioned it before, is Anne Boleyn. I have a lot of sympathy for her and the situation she was in, but that could certainly fit the sort of like the performative, very intelligent, provoked an energy of change and reformation because of the relationship. Much of this was private, a lot of intrigue, but as I say, also Machiavelli jumps to mind. So but whatever it is, you are a really interesting balance of kind of a seductive, artistic, performative, you know, you are your product in a way, but you're also able to sort of provoke change, provoke ideas, and work at the kind of shadowy end of things so that people are maybe looking at things they would not otherwise look at as well. I mean, one other way of reading this would maybe be a jester or something like that. If we sort of see a lot of mercurial energy coming through, that's a possibility as well too, because the jester within a royal court had a lot of power and a lot of influence because they could speak truth to power in a way nobody else could. So we'll see what we get. So what we're going to ask a little bit more to try and get a sense about what the role was that you had. Then what would your sort of gifts and your skills and allies have been, and what would your greatest challenges and foes have been? And then we're going to look at how that, with another tarot deck, how that would translate into this world, you know, how you would bring that sort of persona into this world. So firstly, just a little bit more about it. Ten of Coins, Eight of Wands reversed, Four of Cups, the Empress reversed, oh, okay, Knight of Swords reversed, Five of Swords. Okay, now if I was reading this as a past life, and I think I'll kind of look at it as both, I'll read it kind of like a past life and then talk about what this means about your role and your skills. What I would say about the past life is you probably came from a wealthy family. You definitely were in the inner circle, and that makes sense. If you're going to have this sort of influence, that would be the case. I would guess that you were female and that you did not have a lot of liberty. You were there at the behest to some degree of the sort of family line, and you maybe didn't necessarily get to marry as you would have wanted to or anything like that. This was very much, it was very transactional. It was very much about power, but you had a lot of determination. So the energy here is sort of someone who came from money or came from a wealthy family, but was not necessarily able to follow what they would most emotionally want to do. It is possible that you could, with this sort of pattern, not have got sort of married, been somebody who had an affair or something like that. If the Empress reversed, say you were a female and it was a king and there was the queen, you may well have been someone who had an affair, but you were connected to your family's fortunes in that way. But you also were very, very determined. So whatever situation you're in, and I think one of the things that this shows is that you had the capacity to understand the politics of the time, and you had a very strong sense of connection to your family, to the dynasty of your family. You might have been a little bit emotionally irritated by that or emotionally stuck. You may have had your own sort of affairs to the side if you had a marriage of convenience or something like that. But it looks to me like someone who knew how to navigate the politics with a kind of almost a grim determination and an unsentimental way of doing things. and use emotional energy in some way to get past blocks where there was sort of like, because you were meant to be a change agent, or you were a change agent. Now, as I say, if it's not that this was a life that you lived, because not everybody who's come to this necessarily has to have lived in a medieval court, but the type of person you would be is someone who had a very strong sense of the material and political energy, very determined, not going to give up easily, able to deal with things that slow down progress or get in the way, able to use emotional blocks to your advantage to some degree. So it feels to me like you would have been either a paramour within a royal court, using your sort of emotional energy and your position in a royal sort of like court to your advantage, and you knew what you were doing, or you were a political person within that yourself. You were a sort of a member of one of the families connected to the court, and you made a decision that you were going to maintain and keep that position of power, money and prestige, even potentially at the sort of cost of sort of like the more emotional side of things. So you could have been sort of someone who decided to make your life being a political advisor, and not so much sort of someone who was sort of living on the land with a family or something like that. So I either feel this is the profile of someone who had to be practical and pragmatic about how love, emotions, or whatever could almost be currency within the court, or you were someone who looked towards sort of family status, money and so forth, even if that was at the cost of the heart. So the interesting thing is with the artist and the work culture, the very high degree of understanding of the culture that you were in, and very able to do some form of art. So it's either political art or as I say, emotional arts. But either way, it's like this is the maintenance or building of material power and influence with almost kind of grim determination. Now, remember, this is an environment that's very difficult to manage. This is not saying that like you would necessarily be like this in your current life. You probably won't have the same pressures, but it would be what you would take from this potentially, and we will be looking at this into your more current life, would be things like understanding the environment, knowing when you need to be unsentimental about something, knowing how to deal with blocks, and knowing how to stick at something until you get the outcome that you want. So we're going to do 3 cards for what would have been your allies and your gifts, and 3 cards for what would have been potentially challenges or foes, given that sort of personality profile and so forth. Okay, allies and gifts. You were definitely a change agent. You're definitely a change agent. Wheel of Fortune reversed, Hermit reversed. Wow, you had significant skills and allies. You were big, like you would have been a big mover and shaker in this. Although there would have been the sense that you knew how to maintain your own position, your family's position, whatever it might have been, you were going to cause change. You were likely to rise to power when there was some form of misfortune or difficulty. So you come into your own, and in this life as well, when there is a difficulty and you can problem solve. And that's when you come out of being kind of like just watching from the shadows, or being more sort of like private. It's like you're drawn forth and brought forward when the great change has to occur, and where the capacity to deal with that is necessary. So I feel like you're, as I say, you're a change agent, but you're not showy. You are sort of someone who comes forward to solve the problems when it's necessary, and then wants a bit of a quiet life, but you want to know that you've maintained your power and status and money and all those sort of things. So you had a lot of skill around changing the fortunes of people. You may well have been involved in the rise or fall of people who were vying for the royal throne, that kind of thing. So what about challenges? What would your personality and nature have made as challenges or foes? Page of Cups reversed, 2 of Coins, King of Cups reversed. Okay, it was definitely the emotional stuff. And there is a side of you that had a bit of a heart, or would have had a heart of a poet. There is a side of you now that is very artistic, very much of the heart. But the challenge was that you would not be in an environment that was, you would not be called to the environment even when that was what was being looked for. So I think this is more like a Machiavelli or some sort of major advisor to the king or queen, rather than a paramour, because it's not around that, unless this is saying that, you could have been a paramour and you had rivals for the heart of the person that you were connected to. But I feel much more like the choices that you had around pursuing emotional things would have been limited, because your role, your energy was towards change. Your energy was towards the kind of and also the maintenance of power, prestige, or whatever it is at times of change. So I feel like there would have been a side of you that would have put aside the emotional. It's also possible that when necessary, and this might have been kind of things that you had to deal with foes, you might have actually had to balance more than one sort of like interested party in what was going on and appear to be on more sides than you actually were. So, and remember, this is fun. This is just a bit of fun, because this is what it would take to survive a medieval court. It's not saying right now that you would be doing that. But that is what we do want to look at, though, is how is it, like if you had that kind of personality and capacity, or would have been able to operate like that in that sort of environment. We're going to get 3 cards for like in any way at all that you might use some of these skills in your current life, and also what would you secretly have up your sleeve from that time had you lived that life in your modern life. So right now, this sort of very pragmatic, very strong, change-age person, not showy, but very good at the art of diplomacy and negotiation, that would have survived a medieval court very well. What aspects of that show up in your current life? Judgment reversed, Queen of Wands, 2 of Wands. Okay, in this life, more of the art of it, the kind of the diplomacy, the charisma, all of that sort of thing. I think it was a little bit more in the or would have been a little bit more in the shadows in a medieval court, but in this current world, you are able to present in a very, very strong and charismatic way. You present choices, and you have far more choices. It's also showing that you are more sovereign to yourself, whereas I think you were something else was sovereign to you or would have been sovereign to you in the medieval court. You also have a lot of freedom to decide what to do. There was a calling that you would have had. Your energy here would have manifest as the provoker, the person who dealt with the tower, the person who dealt with the Wheel of Fortune. In this life, you have much more freedom to define who you want to be. So it's sort of like you're not caught up in the same sort of politics. And to the degree, if you have it anywhere in a workplace or anything like that, you have such a strong persona. You make choices rather than feeling trapped and having to be resilient, so to speak, in less open environments. So what skills, though? Because that would have been a highly skilled sort of life if you had it, and you may well have, what would you have up your sleeve from the medieval sort of experience? 8 of Pentacles, a lot of skills, a lot of learning too, actually. The Chariot, the capacity to find and follow destiny when it's necessary, and the 6 of Swords, the calmness to do it. So at this point in your life, say you had a medieval life like that, you have all these sort of skills around being able to take things forward and do it in a way that's peaceful and sensible. You're very, very skilled in that sort of diplomacy. But for the most part, it's more the artists and the work culture, that kind of energy that you're using at the moment. It would suggest happily that things are not as full on as they would have been in the medieval court. Okay, so let's have a little bit of a look at your character sort of in that environment compared to what your modern equivalent would be. So we're just going to use just a few different decks to just see different aspects of character. So firstly, a couple of cards around the medieval court characteristics, and then a couple of cards around its modern equivalent. So the medieval, empathetic. So that's interesting because you did have like the Page of Cups, King of Cups reversed. I think that you used this where you potentially had challenges or foes. I think you did understand what was going on. I think your personality would have been more kind of practical and pragmatic, but you did understand who you were dealing with. This is where you had, or I'm saying did as though you actually had the life, and you might have. But let's say you would be able to understand the people that you were around very well in this environment. And fearless, yeah, very, very, nothing really fazed you. How does that sort of play out in the modern world? Enthusiastic, yeah, see, it's more the artistic. The fearlessness is now more enthusiasm. You're not caught in as toxic an environment as the average medieval court would be, and that's a good thing. Also, soft, yeah, and you can be far softer here. See the soft sort of expression on her face. It's not as full on. Yeah, but your sort of skills and your ability and your personality in a medieval court would have been drawn far more to the power and to the time, the changes of the times. Let's use the Colour Goddess deck for just a card for each, just to compare the energies. So in the medieval court, sepia, nostalgia, reminiscence, reverie. You would have been very good at using memory, custom and practice, the culture that you were dealing with, family connections, all of those sort of things. You would have known how to use those to your advantage. Would have been a lot at that time about, what family did you come from, who knew who, that kind of thing. In this world, we have emerald, fortune, luck, and luxury. So, but this time around, you can make your own fortune. You can focus on your own, with emerald as a colour like the heart chakra, your own love and what would be lucky and good for you. So it's not really luck though. I think it is the skills that you're using. You're just using them in a way that creates something more for you rather than relying almost on the history and the family connections and all of those sort of machinations. It's much more about making your own luck. Okay, then we're also going to have a look at the sort of divine masculine and divine feminine aspects. So looking at the divine feminine firstly, let's look at the divine masculine firstly, actually. That's the first deck I picked up. So a masculine energy in the medieval court that would have shown up. Sorry, I almost dropped the cards. I always feel I want to shuffle again when I do that. Oh, okay, aggressor. Okay. So, but I think that would have been kind of necessary in this environment. You would have had to fight for things and stand up for things. Just to kind of survive that sort of environment. How would the divine masculine have or how does it operate now, taking into account that sort of energy? Soldier, okay, so you still fight for things, but it's sort of like more within a group and for a cause. This seems to be more around personal safety, personal issues, personal interests. What about the divine feminine energy of you in the medieval court? Intention, conception, beginnings, headwaters. Yeah, I think you're all about change, and I think it was about bringing it in a good way. But you did have some sort of seductive energy to get things focused in the way that you wanted. And I think you would have used this more than this, but you had this if it was necessary. Then in terms of the divine feminine energy in your current life, gravity, magnitude, soul retrieval, centering. You do have a very strong energy and a very strong, here's the Queen of Wands, very strong sort of sense of who you are. And that would have like become something different in the different environments. I feel like the overall total energy here would have been you a female in a probably male-dominated medieval court, but you used your sort of feminine instincts to be able to keep things on an even keel a lot, and only had to bring that out when it was necessary. Whereas in this world, it's like you can use that energy more, regardless of whatever gender you are or identify with. Okay, so let's finish up, because as I say, this is meant to be a bit of fun. Let's finish up with a modern day version of someone successful that could be a bit like you would have been in the medieval court. So I'm using the Success Oracles. This is just a humorous deck. There's lots of different people in here, and I just want to say, if somebody comes up that, would be potentially a bit iffy, politically. There's no endorsement of any of these that I'm doing by using this deck. I'm just using it as an example of something and for the fun of what they would be advising you. So for you, wow, Walt Disney. Now that's interesting because he had a lot of power. He started a dynasty, you know, like he started a corporation that carried his name through time. It's interesting because the Empress was reversed. We've got the conception stuff here. It's possible that you could have had a very pivotal role also in changing destiny by having a child with all of this, given the kind of concept of, you know, children's television or whatever associated with that. But he was also about creating the dream, creating the fantasy, the very beguiling way, the way that, you know, like the way that movies and so forth can propagandize, let's put it that way. So I think this is really showing the artistic side. You had an artistic side, a way with words, a way with presenting things, a way with performance. But I think you also just had this you would have had this very, very sort of like solid, traditional, problem-solving, political acumen. But his advice, just to finish this off, is it cute? Does it sing? That's the way you make ka-ching. So it was definitely use this sort of like creative energy that you have. Pull at heartstrings, hold the purse strings, and the happiest place on earth charges admission. So I think this is really just pointing to how you use this more to create your own luck and create your own destiny, as opposed to being within a sort of system where your particular skills, abilities and so forth would have taken you into a very kind of precarious, but you were fearless and able to deal with it sort of niche. So I hope that was fun. It was just a little journey, like who would have you been in the Tudor court or the Borgia court or whatever. And hopefully it was enjoyable and how that connects to now. If you did enjoy it, please like the video and subscribe. If you care to share in the comments, I'd love to hear. Otherwise, I hope to see you in future readings. Welcome, Pile 2, to your reading. So when I saw Temperance come up as one of the choices, I thought of two types of roles in a medieval court in particular. One would have been some sort of spiritual leader, and there is a possibility of that with this. So we will have a look at that if that looks like that's kind of occurring. And the reason I sort of say that is that sometimes sort of spiritual leaders would sort of go on pilgrimages. So we've got Void, of course, missing. We've got the explorer there. And then we've got Temperance, which always makes you think of the kind of alchemy of balancing things. You know, so potentially spiritual leader, or even at a pinch, you know, alchemist or magician within a court. That is a possibility. But the other thing I thought about was a diplomat, and I kind of feel that's the most likely. We'll see what we get with tarot, because I just sort of feel, again, diplomats tended to come from different countries. So they were missing from their home country for the most part, for long periods of time that they would come to the other courts. So they were exploring, in a sense, the world by doing that. They also had to be a chameleon very much. So this is kind of like modern day sort of like career aspects that could be a bit like it. So they were definitely like that. And with Aquarius, I mean, the main thing they had to do was know what was going on, be really close to the people of power, understand that, and negotiate outcomes and bring information back. So go away, you know, like plead the case or whatever they were going to do for their foreign king or queen, come back with information and intelligence, almost like sort of very medieval sort of time spies in a way. So I feel it most fits that, but it could fit sort of spiritual or kind of magician / alchemist as well. So let's see a little bit more with tarot. So what we're going to do with the tarot is, with the Baroque tarot, we're firstly going to put out some additional cards for more about what type of role you would have had. And you know, how I sort of found in pile 1 is that I sort of felt like I was talking like it was a past life. It doesn't have to be a past life that you had. It could just be an example of your sort of energies and how they would have operated there, which was my initial intent. But just bear with me if I seem to slip in between as though, oh, you would have been or whatever, to you would be if you were there, in whatever way works for you. So if you thought that you had a life in some sort of medieval court, then maybe take it as a bit of a past life reading, but otherwise it's just more a kind of character profile in that sort of environment. So we're going to have a look at a bit more about the role. Then we're going to look at what would have been your greatest allies and sort of like gifts, and then also what could have been your greatest challenges and foes. And then we're going to use a different tarot deck that's more modern to look at modern sort of energies that are similar. So firstly, just a little bit more, just to sort of see if we can work out what this role was. the Emperor, the Ten of Coins, the Page of Wands, Three of Swords, the Fool reversed, the Eight of Coins reversed. Okay, so I guess it's also possible you could have been a king or queen with the Emperor there who travelled a lot and was looking to expand. So the explorer, the void, of course, could have been away a lot. So certain medieval courts and so forth, the kings went out on progression. They also went out, to fight wars. So that's a possibility as well, to be both a kind of diplomat to kind of like broker deals, but also to fight where it's necessary. So that's a possibility with the Emperor there. Otherwise, I think it does feel to me, that doesn't feel mystical, magical. It feels more like the separation again, the travel and so forth, the separation maybe from family, children, all of that kind of thing, but the kind of connection to people of power. The wisdom that you would need to bring, the understanding, I've seen all this before, I know the environment I'm in, and bringing very, very distinct skills, sort of like almost, I wouldn't mind betting that if you were a diplomat, for instance, had this been a past life, or if you were using your skills in this sort of environment, I think you would have learned it from when you were very young. You would have been likely to come from families where diplomacy or sort of like political stuff was being done. So I feel like you as a person, you are explorative, you are able to sort of separate out from the emotions of things and look at the sort of the strategic side of it. Very, very smart, very good at learning things, understanding things, and putting on whatever persona you need to do to bring balance. That's what you're trying to do, balance, security, stability. So I feel that's the type of role that you would have had. So let's see, given that, with 3 cards, what would have been your greatest strengths or your greatest allies? The Lovers. Ooh. The Maestro. This is an additional card. The Hierophant. Oh, well, it is possible that for some of you it might have been a spiritual thing with the Hierophant there. So you were a diplomat, but kind of a spiritual diplomat. That is possible. Otherwise, I think the powers of the church and so forth, in whatever form it was, because the church around the medieval times was very, very powerful. It was very politically powerful, would have been part of what connected you. You may, in fact, even have been a diplomat connected to the Vatican or something like that, because that was very, very powerful, at certain times in medieval periods. You were a maestro. You are a maestro. In understanding the power, the spiritual background, the rules, the regulations, all of that sort of stuff, you are that. So you would have been absolutely brilliant at that. You were very, very good at dealing with complex relationship issues as well. So I do feel primarily that that you would have been a diplomat or something of that order, really skilled at it. So what about the challenges or foes that you might have had? Wheel of Fortune reversed, the Sun reversed, Seven of Wands. Okay, I think you would have been in a period where the diplomacy was to try and turn around fortunes that were not working for your sort of ruler or your church or whatever it was, because it looks like you had to deal with reversals of fortune. You had to deal with almost waning empires, or you would have, this is where your skills would have most come out and it would have been most challenged. The good news is I don't think that most of your foes or whatever would have had much, they would have been a little bit too afraid to come up against you, but they would have been watching very carefully to see if you ever fell from favour. So I think what this sort of says is that your energy here would have been very good at being the diplomat, building the empire or reviving the empire, making the right connections, all of that kind of thing. Your foes, the challenges would have been where that was at its most difficult, where there was sort of like wars and things like that. But your foes would have always been watching to see when you were falling from favour. That's the point at which they could have maybe moved in on you. Otherwise, I don't think you would have been gainsayed much. I think that you would have been very, very, it would have been very clear that they were taking on a master. So that's really interesting. So how does that look in modern day? So we're going to look at, what kind of, how would it manifest in this life, and what kind of skills from that time, had it been a past life, would you be manifesting now, have up your sleeve if you needed to be in a challenge or a battle with anyone? So firstly, just a little bit more about this, how it would be showing these skills, this personality profile in the current world. Ace of Cups reversed, the Chariot reversed, the Moon reversed. Okay. And then what about what would you have as a skill or ability up your sleeve from the medieval times if you ever needed it in this life? Five of Pentacles reversed, Knight of Swords, Justice reversed. Okay. So how this sort of energy probably manifests here is that you have a really acute understanding of where there's emotional insincerity. Like, so in the court, it would have been picking up the sort of like relationship dynamics of people in power and politics and all that. In this current world, it's like you have this capacity to see the undisclosed emotion really clearly. You're also able to see where people aren't following their destiny or they're out of balance. Like, it's almost like you could still be a diplomat and be able to deal with very emotionally difficult and murky environments very, very well. But otherwise, I think you could be a therapist, or you could be sort of someone who's a healer. Like, the same sort of ability that would have made you be able to navigate the diplomacy of a medieval court helps you negotiate the issues in the modern day world where kind of things get murky around people's identity, about their ambitions, about emotion, all of that kind of thing. You're a prime psychologist, actually, and that's one of the reasons that you could do that and bring things into balance. What you have up your sleeve too is that when it is necessary, if you think that something is unjust, out of balance in some way, you can very quickly create a group of people around you that go with what you say. You know how to kind of, you'd be an amazing sort of community organizer or something like that. You're able to kind of very quickly instill this sort of sense of what needs to be done to make something better and get the right people around you. So I guess, the diplomats of the medieval court were the practicing psychologists, really. They really knew what they were doing. And they knew how to draw together allegiances and sort of like confederacies, almost of similar viewpoints and so forth. So you could do that as well. So that's very interesting. So let's have a little look at some character aspects as well too. So we're just going to use different decks to show that. So we want to look at kind of like what might have been your medieval characteristics and how they manifest in this current world. So firstly, medieval, soft. Yeah, you're probably saying like the Tempest. This is why I wasn't sure whether it could be like also spiritual. Like you dealt with things, but you were very soft, careful, able to sort of bring people onto your side. And loud, but like loud when necessary. So that's funny. Like you could be soft or loud. You knew when to speak softly. You knew when to speak loudly. So very, very good at working out what kind of like almost volume that you needed to communicate on. In this modern world, this comes like deep. Yeah, people do see you as deep. You really do understand the nuances of things. And curious, and you're going to find out. Like people would not want to try and hide things from you. There's very little point. You would see through it really, really quickly. Let's see some colour energy. So in a medieval court, you would have been aquamarine, change, tides, flow. Yeah. You could move with the change. You were the chameleon. You could do what you needed to do. You could see the shifts and changes within a political environment. In this world, that comes out as teal, creativity, pregnancy, sacred, feminine. I think you get to be much more in the world of the emotion and creativity and so forth in this life using the same sort of skills, whereas you were much more around the political, I would say, or would have been much more around the political that's where your nature would have been drawn if, say, you didn't have a life in those times. Let's have a look at the divine masculine and divine feminine aspects of you. So divine masculine in the medieval times. Activist. Yeah, I guess that would be close to what a diplomat would be. You would have been trying to bring about change. You certainly had an agenda, or would have had an agenda. And now, mentor. Now you're much more likely to teach and draw other people along with you. So it is soft. It's interesting. You were sort of saying as soft, all out as necessary, whereas here it's deep, curious, connected, all that kind of thing. But it's the same sort of energy. It's just a different environment. Then what about the divine feminine aspects across the two types of time periods? For the medieval, hemispheres, collaboration, opposites attract. Also travel. I think about the different sides of the world. I mean, there's definitely this sort of sense that you would have moved around and how you draw different cultures and different viewpoints together. Then in terms of how you use this currently, water, receptive, accepting, unresisting. So yeah, it's much more in the emotional space. I think that the medieval court, you would have been brilliant at this because you really do understand people and psychology and emotions, but it would have been in a much more political structure, whereas in this world, it's like you can concentrate more on the emotional side, on teaching, on that kind of thing, creating something rather than just sort of balancing, shifting worlds and so forth. That would have been the case in a medieval environment. Okay, so what I want to finish with, because as I say, this is just meant to be a bit of fun, is the success oracles. Now, this is just a humorous deck with humorous sayings. And there's a lot of different people in here, some of whom I would probably like and some of whom I wouldn't. I'm not going to necessarily comment on that one way or the other. But they're just versions of successful people. So I just want to see what could have been the sort of energy in the medieval court if it's put in a modern context of success. So... Sorry, almost dropped the cards again. I don't know, I'm being very clumsy today. Robert L. Johnson. So I had to pause and look him up because I didn't know who he was, but he's basically sort of someone who did a lot sort of in sort of people of colour, sort of television and media and all of that kind of thing, and sort of brought more power to that than possibly before, and more vision to that than possibly before. So that's kind of like bringing in new visions. He's very much an entrepreneur. So I think that there is that kind of, in the current environment, in the modern environment, your sort of skills are entrepreneurial and relational. In the medieval court, it would have been diplomatic and explorative. But either way, it was about new worlds, new ways of communicating, new ways of connecting. His advice, and remember this is just meant to be a humorous way of finishing it, is firstly, overlooked markets are right in front of you. So this would have been the sense of getting out into the world and seeing what was going on. Network to net worth. So yes, you definitely, your people skills are really, really strong. And interrupt regularly scheduled programming. So that's also be a change agent. So I think you did have an agenda, or would have had an agenda in the medieval court, just as you have an agenda here now. But in the medieval court, you would have had to do it through diplomacy, whereas in the current world, you can do it through creativity and maybe communication with Robert L. Johnson there. So I hope that you enjoyed the reading. If so, please like the video and subscribe. If you care to share in the comments, I'd love to hear. Otherwise, I hope to see you in future readings. Welcome, Pile 3, to your reading. So you came to the reading with the Sun card as being the choice. And I've got to say, of the three, this was the one that I thought, if there's any pile that's going to be about royalty, it's probably this one, because it sort of really made me think of the Sun King, that kind of concept. So I feel like you would have been someone in the royal family, either a king or queen, or maybe a prince or a princess, something like that, something where there's sort of like the future, the royal sort of line, all of that kind of stuff was involved. Now, I don't know if there's someone exactly like this in history, or whether, because what I found when I've been doing these readings is they sometimes sort of slip between, like, if this was a past life you had as opposed to, who you would have been. So this, what I'm going to describe now as a royal member of a royal family, may never have existed and may just be what you would have been had you been a member of the royal family. Or, if you're a historian, you might think, oh, that sounds like X, Y, or Z. So that's fine either way. But you would have been very much a vibrant sort of energy. There would have been a lot of hope put into your existence. If you were, an heir that was born or something like that into a royal family, there would have been a lot of, rejoicing around it. You would have sort of probably moved into that role over time. You would have been sort of someone who was seen as progressive, enlightened, like in the Enlightenment, that kind of thing with the sun. Very positive. I think you would have brought increase to your country. You would have had a bit of mystery around you, though. I think you might have had some advisors who were into the sort of magic or the occult in some way. Highly clever person, very focused on physical health, very focused on, and also the health, I think, of your country and of your sort of like your subjects. I think that you would have had this very, we are going to grow, we are going to be strategic. You would have been a little bit hard to predict. Very, very charismatic, very, very charismatic, and very connected to the earth, I think, and the health of the earth and that kind of thing. So, as I say, it's interesting. I was thinking the Sun King, which makes you think one of the Louis, I'm not sure which one, was called the Sun King. There was a lot of opulence in his life, but there was a lot of like optimism about him. So, hence the Sun King. But it could also have been sort of anyone who was very much into both the Renaissance and that kind of thing, the sort of sense of enlightenment, as I say, connecting to that sort of time, like that kind of energy. But yeah, you had a mystery around you, or you would have had a mystery around you, because it's sort of like on one hand, very charismatic, very attractive, very strategic, but also very, very secretive when necessary. So that, I mean, and that's probably would have been necessary if you're a royal. You had to be careful who you trusted and so forth. But very focused on health, very fit sort of person. So I don't think you would have been Henry VIII, sort of going around getting very sort of stout and full of ailments or whatever in his sort of middle age or whatever. You feel like very vibrant, very kind of fit energy and so forth. So let's have a look and see a little bit more about the role. Then we're going to have a look at what your sort of gifts and allies would be in this medieval court, and what your challenges and foes potentially could be. Then we're going to have a look at, with another deck, the sort of modern equivalent of it. But firstly, just a little bit more about this. I do think this was a royal life. So it's just, let's see what we would get beyond that. Maestro, you're very skilled at certain things. 3 of Wands, or would have been very skilled at certain things. The Magician, oh yeah, you definitely had. Do you know what you're making me think here of Elizabeth I with John Dee, to be honest. You definitely would have had some sort of like occult advisors. Justice reversed. Death. Ace of Cups reversed. Okay. I think that you would have been royal, very skilled, very charismatic, all of those sort of things. Very much the sort of adventure, taking things out into the new world, all of that kind of thing. You would have definitely had your own court astrologer or magician around you, because you would have been very wary about injustice. I wouldn't mind betting, actually, that you would have found someone in your family line that had suffered an injustice in some way. And so you were very cool or calm about who to fall in love with and why. In fact, this really does make me think of Elizabeth I, I've got to say. So this doesn't mean you had to have been that in a past life, but it's a good prototype, because she was extraordinarily intelligent, great strategist, brought great fortune, and I think is seen as one of the best monarchs that Britain ever had. After Henry VIII was so intent on getting a son, his daughter was actually extraordinary. So there's that kind of energy, and she had John Dee around her. And I think she would have carried with her some sense of the injustice of what happened to her mother, Anne Boleyn. So I feel like it's a very similar sort of energy of that. You would have been very aware of how easy it was for people to be unjustly killed, like where they kept their heads in a royal court. You would have been very careful about where you gave your heart. And of course she didn't really. But as I say, it's just a prototype. You would have understood how to deal with power and mystery, but overall, very, very smart. Like you were obviously born, or you would have been born into this sort of role of power, but you knew how to do it. It was like you were born to it. I suspect any kind of power position that you might have in this life, you were kind of born to, a natural leader, that kind of energy. So let's see what specific gifts you would have had, and then also what potential challenges or foes you might have had. So particular gifts that you in a medieval court would have. 6 of Cups, King of Coins reversed, Knight of Wands, okay, and then what would have your challenges or foes been like? 7 of Wands reversed, no, they were scared of you. The Emperor, the Lovers, okay, all right, so particular gifts, you could be quite unsentimental when you needed to be. If things had to change to increase or, strategically, or if things were not healthy and they needed to be brought into more balance, you would put the energy into change. And I think there would have been a sense of like wanting to expand horizons, expand, the territories, all of that kind of thing. You kind of had a good home life and all that kind of thing, but you were more of moving out of the old and into the new. And I think it's sort of interesting. The sun here is shown with horses, and then we have the knight on the horse here moving forward. So I think that you were of movement, of increase, of fortune, of strategy. But you did keep your own counsel about what was going on materially, which is probably part of the mystery. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if you were sort of someone, or would be someone who, even if there were sort of reversals of fortune, nobody would see it. They would think it was still the good old days. You would keep moving forward till you'd sorted that out. You wouldn't have had many foes, because I think, number one, you would have been very powerful because you were the emperor. You were the king, the queen, or that kind of thing. Other sovereigns could have been foes, which would make sense. But it looks like you were able to have good alliances with them, but potentially other alliances that were going on between other kings and so forth and other countries could have been a challenge on occasion. But by and large, I don't think many would have come against you. You look too powerful. You look too clever. I think that they would have been nervous about that. So let's see what energy there would be in the modern world that was a bit like this. So we're going to look at like you in the modern world with this sort of personality, and then also what kind of gifts could you have up your sleeve if you had this life in a medieval world that you could use in this life. So firstly, a bit like how this translates into this world for you. 2 of Wands reversed, 7 of Swords reversed, the Empress. Okay, you're still very powerful, but it's a more kind of, it's not sort of as in the sort of patriarchal kind of world of the medieval court. You put a lot of that power into creativity, but you're still as smart as. You are incredibly strategic. You don't worry about that. You're realistic about the choices. And I think this would have been the case too. You would have been very realistic about where the power was and what you needed to do. So I feel like in this modern world, you're realistic rather than a dreamer, but you can still really create because you just have this natural power about you. And what would be one of the things you could have up your sleeve in the modern world as a result of a life like that in a medieval court? Page of Cups. 5 of Cups reversed, 6 of Wands reversed. Okay, people might underestimate you a bit more in this life than they would have then. In this life, you would have been, in this sort of like version, you would have been a king or a queen. So you would have already been recognised. What you have up your sleeve in this life is that you are going to more create your own world. So you kind of might fly under the radar a bit with people until you are ready to be seen. So that's actually something that's sort of like you're not as visible in the way you would have been as a king or queen. You also know how to turn around emotional disappointments. This is again a strategy, and that kind of have a very emotionally healthy balance of things. You keep your counsel and you know how to be a bit hidden, a little bit underestimated. Like you couldn't have done that in this role in a medieval court because you were a king or a queen or something like that, or a prince or a princess. But in this world, you aren't as visible on that level, leaving you all the strategy and the cleverness to be able to create what you want and to fly a little bit under the radar so that you don't have to deal with people trying to kind of take your terrain in the way that you would have as a king or a queen. Okay, so let's have a look at some other personality aspects. So how they might have manifested in a medieval court compared to modern day. The medieval court. Homebody. Well, that's interesting. I think you would have been very much in your terrain, and you would have spent a lot of time in the court. And unique. You might have been very, or your energy there might have been very much, we need to see what's different and good about our kingdom, not about everywhere else. So you might have been more interested in the land where you were than conquering other lands. So I do get a sense you moved out a bit, but I think it would have been more to increase the power and the, I guess, profitability of your own kingdom, so to speak. How that plays out now. Teacher. Okay, so you may now teach people how to be strategic, how to increase things for themselves. And painter. Wow, much more artistic. So you might have learnt those sort of skills too, or called, you might have had a sort of creative bent. But if you're in the medieval court, if you're born as a king or a queen or something like that, you have to focus elsewhere. In this life, you can focus more on what you want to do, so the more creative side comes out. Okay, let's see, in terms of creativity, painting or whatever, let's look at the colour energy between the two. So a colour energy around a medieval experience for you. Sienna, plans, preparation, training. Yeah, it would have been all quite serious. And doing the strategy and being ready and having the skills. Whereas now, salmon, obstacles, perseverance, persistence. Okay, that same energy comes through and being able to break through obstacles. But see how it's like a lighter energy, a lighter colour? I feel like it's not as heavy a burden, but you would have brought through that kind of resilience. You have a natural resilience. You see things through. Okay, so let's see divine masculine attributes that you might have in either a medieval or a modern context. So medieval. Scribe. Okay, so you may have wanted, you might have been very well educated, or you probably would have sought to be very well educated and to keep your own sort of journals and your own sort of interests. You would have been very interested in history. And in this life, that kind of energy. Ooh, judge. So a different sort of power. But again, it's interesting. This sort of like judge has a lot of power and so forth. Some of you may work in the legal system, or some of you may be like using a lot of your strategy and understanding and knowledge and that sense of history to judge what to do into the future. When you're making a decision to act, it may be based on a really good sense of history. Then the divine feminine aspect of you in a medieval court would have manifest as Heyoka. Oppositeness, novel path, unexpected. This is the mystery. There would have been a side of you that would have been a little bit hard to predict. And then, as I say, the spiritual side, all that kind of thing, which is probably part of the recipe of your success and why people were always on their toes and didn't know quite how to deal with you, which would have been a very good energy to have in a medieval court. Whereas in this life, partnerism, equality, sharing and co-rule. Yeah, you don't have to be uneasy as the head that wears the crown. You're actually looking for the good relationships and connections so that you work with people rather than just being the ruler. But I do think you're a natural leader, I think, in whatever you do. That's why you would have been the king or queen in a court, and you have that sort of almost naturally regal sort of sense around you. Okay, so to finish off, we're just going to get a card from the Success Oracle. So this is just successful modern people. Some of whom I don't particularly like, to be honest, but I'm not going to necessarily say if that's the case. It's got nothing to do with whether I like them or anybody else likes them. It's just an indication of a type of success. So we're just sort of like wanting to, and it's a fun thing. It's just meant to be fun, just like this whole reading was meant to be fun. So it's just meant to get their advice and a bit of their energy to sort of see how you're a modern day medieval power broker and in what way, and a success broker. Muccia Prada. So that I would presume is Prada as in fashion. And I just paused to check that, and that's right. So sort of Prada sort of luxury goods. But the interesting thing was she was a political scientist before all of that. So this is the strategist. This is the really clever mind. Then connecting maybe with something that's more creative, something that's more artistic rather than necessarily political, but like a really, really strong political sense. So that makes sense. You have that. You have a really brilliant political radar. You have a natural leadership, and then you also have this kind of capacity now to turn it into creativity in some way. Her advice is strike while the market is as in hot. Applique your pattern to the big picture. So yeah, big picture. You would have been very big picture as a monarch. And wear many hats, but design all of them. So yeah, and have that sense of like innate regalness that you are the person who writes your own story. You are the person who judges what you want to do. You can partner with people, but you've always got to be a little bit unpredictable because it needs to be your story. So you're the natural leaders of the three that we've been looking at. But you're also a bit of an artist inside, and you balance those two things together, and I think you would have survived extremely well as a very popular and very visionary monarch in a medieval court. So I hope you enjoyed the reading. If so, please like the video and subscribe. If you care to share in the comments, I'd love to hear. Otherwise, I hope to see you in future readings.